You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. My name is Carolee Culpepper, and I am here with Dale Sellers, our Executive Director. How are you today, Dale?
I'm doing really good. I'm excited about a lot of things that God's doing in the kingdom. I'm excited about things happening in our lives personally. And I know you're excited today because you're leaving as soon as we get through recording and hitting a girls trip, you said.
I am.
What is a girls trip? I wanted to ask you about that.
Oh my gosh.
There's probably stuff you can't tell, huh?
Well, me and 5 of my college girls try once a year to do something together.
Cool.
And get together for the weekend. Yeah. So COVID, all that, the last couple of years, we haven't really done anything. And then this year we tried to get together in Clemson for the weekend, and snowpocalypse happened. So we were like, you know what? We're not going to let this beat us. So we planned a little trip down to Murrells Inlet for the weekend. I'm really excited.
That'd be fun.
I know.
And for those who are listening, Murrells Inlet's about 4 hours away from us. It's down on the coast near Myrtle Beach. Something cool I'm doing today, as soon as we finish the podcast, I'm having lunch with the guy that I played high school football with. We graduated high school together in 1980. There were 3 all-conference football players, me, him, and one other guy. And we are getting together. I have not sat down with him personally in 42 years. Is that right?
Wow.
And we connected the other day. I saw he turned 60. And so I just sent a message to my messenger. Because I'm going to turn 60 in a few weeks. And the Lord just said, go to lunch with him. And so I said, hey, man, would you like to connect? And so we're going to lunch today. And one of my other friends is praying about it because, I want to make sure my friend knows Jesus. And so it's going to be fun to go hang out with him. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. We were back in the day when the way that we did football back then, they don't do this anymore.
Oh, well, how's that? Just back in the dark ages, right?
Yeah, back when we still used a rock, that's a Flintstone.
I mean, did they have cars with wheels then? I don't know. I'm just kidding.
They did. When they airlifted us off the field, it just meant they lifted up the gurney and carried us off. There was no help. But anyway, I'm going to hang out with that guy today, and I am so excited about it. Been doing a lot of reflecting lately.
That's great.
So it's kind of there. So I'm really excited about that, but I'm also super excited about our guest today.
Me too.
I have known him for quite some time. Our mutual friend, Kevin Smith, really kind of connected us, but Hykeng Paul is with us today. He is a great, great brother. And I just got some cool things I want to talk to him about today. So Hykeng, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much, man. It's an honor to be a part. Thank you.
Well, we just love when we start our podcast off, we love just to sit and ask someone to share their story with us. And so if you would take a few minutes and tell us your story, and then we kind of have some areas we want to dive in a few things with you. So it's all yours.
Great. Well, yeah, I'm Hykeng. I grew up here in South Carolina in a little town called Antroville. That's about 30 minutes from Anderson in Abbeville County. So most people.
That's where I used to deer hunt, so people know.
Okay. So most people
deer hunt
there, but not really Antroville. Antroville is one of those towns that you drive through. You don't really go to it.
I've actually never heard of it.
Okay, see. But yeah, that's where I grew up. 2 amazing parents. My dad recently went home to be with the Lord a couple of months ago, but was raised with an older brother, 2 younger sisters, and so. Grew up in church, as most pastors say. I was a drug baby. My parents drugged me to church. And so I was at church Sunday with my parents. The rest of the week, I was in karate. So my dad was a karate instructor. And so I learned at a very early age of how to teach karate. And so the beautiful gift of it is when I came to the Lord, it's helped me with teaching and within discipleship, et cetera, and ministry. And so all of that to say, I had my Sunday experience in church with my family, which was a Black church. I will specifically say Flat Rock AME. Mm-hmm. And so I had a little bit of confusion of why the church was all Black, but then I would go to school and my friends were all white. So at an early age, I always questioned, why is this? And so kind of the response that I received as a kid was they do their thing and we do our thing. And so when I was 13, I was invited to another local church here in Anderson. As we're teaching karate, a couple of folks invite me to High Praises, which is right down the road here from Newspring.
Chris, the Stars pastor.
Yeah. So I went from Flat Rock to High Praises. I met the Lord at 13. It was the first time that I heard the gospel and understood it. And I always had a love for God. I just didn't understand the importance of Jesus. And so it was on that Wednesday night that I gave my life to the Lord. And then throughout high school, I kind of straddled the fence. I was holy on Sunday, and the rest of the week, I was doing my own thing because I had moved away from the student ministry and honestly just, was into sports and finding my identity in girls and all the things of this world. And so when I got to college at Tri-County, as I was going to transfer into Clemson and play football, I was at Tri-County. I was invited to Newspring, and that's when my life radically changed. I was discipled through, honestly, serving. And so at the time, we were very evangelistic as a church and we weren't really discipleship heavy. So a lot of my discipleship came through serving. And so that's when I went from, straddling the fence Christian to being a true disciple. And then I wanted to make more and more disciples. So got involved with the student ministry. And then in 2012, I came on staff. And so June 6th of this year, I'll be on staff for 10 years here at Newspring.
Cool.
And so within serving in Newspring, I met my now wife and Kareen. So in September of this year, we'll be married 8 years. We've been blessed with 2 beautiful children, and Prince and Ava, and they're just amazing. So I'm super blessed. Been on, like I said, on staff for 10 years coming up here at Newspring, and my role is unity and diversity here. So
that's awesome. When you say your discipleship,
I like it.
I had a quick question. When you say your discipleship came through serving, first of all, what were you doing? And second of all, how did that happen?
Yeah. So of course, with, again, the type of church that we were at the time of just very evangelistic, groups weren't really pushed as heavily within Newspring. So my group came through the folks that I was serving with, and we started to do life together. And so,
okay, I gotcha.
Started out just greeting with our student ministry. And as I was greeting, I started to be in smaller circles and being invited into spaces of leadership where, I would watch what was going on behind the scenes. And it stirred my affection of, hey, there's more things in my life that I need to get better so that I can grow in my leadership within the church and in life in general. And so through that, I was invited to do life with guys like Brad Cooper and Riley Cummings, where we would go to breakfast once a week and we would talk about scripture and reading scripture and all the things above. And so that's when I really started to grow in my relationship with the Lord.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I think that a lot of times people think serving is just serving, serving other people, but you kind of, that was the catalyst for you and, come into a closer relationship with God. So it kind of probably benefited you way more, than other people. Yeah.
Life-changing experience for me. I always give thanks to Brad and those guys for inviting me in, because it was also the moment that I was exposed to what the church was actually meant to be about. I always saw the place where the pastor preaches and, can do whatever he wants throughout the rest of the week. And so that was from my cultural context of how I was raised. But it taught me a lot more and grew my affection for the Lord. So.
Well, before we get too deep into all the spiritual stuff, you need to finish the one important point was, did you actually play Clemson football?
I did not. So that's what's interesting.
That is not what I thought you were going to ask.
Wait, I didn't want to blow by that moment, because we have like Jesse on our team who's down in Georgia, and then we got Bobby on our team who's down in Alabama, but he is in Pelham, Alabama. And so I know the listeners were sitting on the bated breath, just wondering, did he get to play football at Clemson?
No, I did not get to play football. It's such an interesting story all in itself. But so in high school, as I said, I straddled the fence. One of the reasons, one of the things that produced from that is I wasn't intentional with my schoolwork. And so I had to go to Tri-County for a couple of years to then transfer in. Well, in that process, I was going to transfer in as a preferred walk-on to play slot receiver. I played quarterback in high school at BHP, Belton Honeypath. Go Bears.
Used to play against them in high school myself.
Yeah. So, so I was going to go in as a preferred walk-on. And in that transition, my dad was sick with cancer. So even my schoolwork at Tri-County was kind of skewed. But then I got my grades up and everything. And as I tried to transfer in, I didn't get accepted. And so at the same time, I started serving in Fuse in our student ministry at church. And I really felt God called me into ministry over football, because football was going to be what my dad wanted, what I wanted, because my dad didn't get to fulfill that dream. So I wanted to fulfill it for him. But then I felt God called me into ministry, that it was more about what he wanted for my life than what I wanted. And so I've been a part ever since at the church.
You and your dad were really close, weren't you?
We were. Yep.
So he passed recently. Kind of walk us through what this process has been like for you.
Yeah, man, it's been very difficult. I think over the past couple of weeks, it's been even more difficult. As you talk about Murrells Inlet, Carolee, my family and I went there last week. Actually, we go there here for spring break. So my wife and I and our kids. But all that to say, we had some time to just kind of sit from the normal way of life. And as we sat, it kind of sat in a little bit more of that this is a reality. And so all of that to say, it's been a difficult thing to come to grips with, that he's gone to be with the Lord. Of course, we rejoice in that, but still grieving on this side of it, that we miss him a lot. And so back in December, I need to back up a little bit more. Back in 2008, my dad was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. It's a type of bone cancer. And so he had fought cancer for quite some time. But then back in December of this year, he had the flu. And then that led to him having COVID and bronchitis. So everything just kind of jumped on at once. And his body literally shut down in January of this past year. So January 21st, he went home to be with the Lord. So it's been a difficult process, but at the same time, I know many folks have walked through it. We've, have such a great family and great friends that have helped us grieve through the process and helping us with it. So
have you found yourself, because you work at a very busy church and there's a lot of capacity, a lot of requirement of you, and so your capacity is always full. Have you found, and what made me think of this is what you said about being at the beach. Have you found that you just need some time to go and sit and let it process, and haven't had that time yet?
Yeah, I'm definitely learning, especially after last week, that I need more time to grieve. I'm naturally a perfectionist anyway, so I get that from my dad. If there's any,
well, I might as well step away now. I've got two perfectionists on.
I'm one of those. I don't, multiple different people have different ideas of Enneagram. It's witchcraft, etc.
That's the first I've heard that.
Church people, everyone has a different idea of what it is. But anyways, I'm an Enneagram 1, which is a perfectionist. So I want for everything to be just right. And I'm a busybody. So it's really hard for me to sit down and reflect, because I don't want to really touch that. I want to act like everything is okay. But yeah, I'm hurting, to say the least.
Yeah.
Well, I really encourage you. God gave us grief, and grief is not something to run from; it's something to run to.
That's right.
And we could spend the rest of the podcast on that, so we're not going to go down that road for sure. But I was kind of wondering how you were doing. I did want to hit something that you did that I just absolutely was blown away with, and I'm trying to remember when it was. But you spoke. I don't think it's been a complete year, but I saw a message where you spoke at Newspring, and about the middle of it, you just got really raw honest. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Man, so one of my faults is I get really raw and honest quickly. And so
well, you did that day, because you're like going along, we're all bebopping along having a normal church service, and the next thing I know, everybody in the house is crying, including you. What walk us through what happened that day. That was so powerful, if you remember.
Yeah. So that was I think you're talking about the one that happened about a year ago.
Yeah.
But I share my experience of when, it's a message on intimacy, and I'm talking about intimacy with my wife. But at the same time, what I had to learn is intimacy is more than what's physical. It's emotional as well and spiritual. And so all of that to say, intimacy went to another level in our marriage when we were trying to have our firstborn, our son. And so we had gone to the doctor to throughout the process. And one of the things that the doctors had said to us is that our son was shrinking in my wife's stomach. And so my wife and I were having just such a, tough moment in that time, of course, as any parent, to know that your child may not make it. And so we had to ask the question of what exactly does that mean? Because, a lot of doctors will say things as if you know exactly what they're talking about. But then the doctor told us, hey, this means that he could be a stillborn baby. And so we walk out of the doctor's office and I immediately get in the car and start crying. And my wife is trying to hold it together. And I then tell her, this is my fault. Because of my life before following Jesus, the abortion that I experienced in college, God is getting me back for this. And so it was in that moment that my wife began to rebuke the enemy, pray over me, and at the same time for us to reach out to our friends and family to pray for us and with us as well. And I kid you not, the next time we went back to the doctor, they said the baby is growing, and we walk out of the doctor's office and it's snowing outside. And it was God's way of telling me that my sins are as white as snow. And so in that moment, it was just a beautiful experience. And I've just held on to it forever. And so with that, it was a very intimate moment for my wife and I, and with the Lord. And so I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, Dale. And hopefully
it was just one of the most powerful messages that I've ever been in. And you caught us so by surprise. You're teaching on, they gave you a topic to teach on, and then it's kind of like you talk for like, I don't know, half an hour, and then it's like, okay, all right, I'm done with that part. Now let me get honest. And dude, I'm crying, my wife's crying, everybody around me's crying. I mean, we're not even in the room with you, we're watching on video, and it was just, and I texted you that afternoon and just said, dude, thank you for your transparency. Because that's where effective ministry happens, when we get honest. And which is this kind of leads into where one of the things I wanted to cover with you today. One of my passions at 95 Network, and I have said it a lot on the podcast lately, and I don't apologize for it because it's an issue that I want to see resolved, is the just working together so that our church services every Sunday aren't the most segregated hour in America, which they are. They still are. That phrase was coined back when I was a kid growing up in high school. That's 11 o'clock, which was typical Sunday time. 11 o'clock on Sundays is the most segregated hour in the country. It still is 40 years later.
Yeah.
And I want to just kind of walk through some things with you. I don't have a specific agenda, but just kind of talk a little bit about why do you think we can't seem to come together? No, that's not a big question, so you can solve that one.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's so many different ways that I can go here.
Well, I want you to know that with our podcast, we want you to be honest. So that's the first step. We give you permission to be honest.
Yeah. Well, let me tell a little bit of my story within that to help bridge that gap, hopefully. But all of that to say, I wanted to be specific in the beginning that I grew up in an AME church, which is African American Methodist Episcopal. And so I had no idea as a kid how the AME church started, why it was all Black. I didn't learn that until years ago. And so all of that to say, that was my experience in church. And then when I was 13, I was invited to High Praises right down the road. Everyone there was all white. I was the only Black kid in the space. And so I then questioned, well, why is this church white? And then the one I go to on Sunday is Black. So then my parents transitioned to Redemption World Outreach Center in Greenville, which is multicultural. So I'm like, why isn't every church like this? The pastor here is white, but there are also Black people here. I see Hispanics. I see all different types people in this place. And so there had to be something different. We're preaching the same gospel, we're reading out the same scripture, but for some reason we're so segregated. And when I go to school, it's integrated. Mm-hmm. And so I've just over the years gone down a path of researching history from a biblical standpoint, and then at the same time understanding the history of America. And that's what has highlighted for me. The two differences have been that there's a difference in America and a difference in scripture. But oftentimes, even though we preach the scriptures, we lean more towards our leaning politically here in America. And I really see that in a lot of ways, the political divide has divided our churches, which is a shame to me. And I want to help with that so that even though we're different racially and ethnically, we can still have different views politically, but we still need to come together as one, because Christ prayed that in John 17, the book of Acts. Luke reveals to us what this looked like. And at the same time, the Apostle Paul, who was Jewish, preached not only to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles, nations. And so as I've started to dig into those things, it's like, man, we've got to see that Paul, the Apostle Paul, most of his churches were multi-ethnic. Now, the language of multi-ethnic wasn't there, but what you see a lot is Jew and Gentile. And so that's why we want to use the language here at Newspring of a multi-ethnic church. And so from there, I'd love for you to ask me more questions, but I just kind of wanted to lay that as a foundation, if you will.
Well, the first one you alluded to, I want you to describe. You said, African Methodist Episcopal, and the history. Tell us the history of that. I mean,
yeah. So I did some research just to understand where this came from, and there was a pastor named Richard Allen who was at a Methodist gathering years and years back. I think this was in the 1800s. Actually, was at a gathering with all white people. He gets up to preach, and after he preaches, he's then basically crucified and saying, "Hey, you can't preach here. You're not allowed," et cetera, et cetera. He and a guy by the name of Absalom Jones, who were, important figures to the faith, who had a love for Jesus and a passion for the church. And as they're preaching, they're being told, "Hey, you have to leave here. You don't belong," et cetera. And instead of, and this is why I love Black history, instead of them denouncing the faith, they decided to branch off and start a denomination. And that's where it wasn't just the Methodist Church, it was the African American Methodist Church. And so even though there were spaces where Black people couldn't come together with white people, Black people still wanted to have a place of worship and worshiping Jesus. And so for me personally, I would just candidly say, I don't know that I could have done that, because I know that I would have questioned God himself. But for men to not only denounce their faith, but to say, hey, even if they won't allow us to come in, specifically white people at the time, we will continuously worship where we are. And I just don't think that most white people know that history. So all of that to say, the Black church should have never been started if you really dig into it. And that's why I'm so passionate about white people now understanding why most Black churches won't allow white people to come in. It's because there's so much trauma and so many wounds of the past that it's hard to trust our white brothers and sisters today. And so that's, built up over generations. It's not something that's going to immediately happen. It's going to take all of us pursuing this first in prayer, but also in our habits daily. So
absolutely.
What do you think are some things that, both sides could do to reach for unity, and start maybe working together a little bit more for, Christ?
Question. I think I always tell, pastors and whoever, you have to start with where you are and what are the things that you actually want to see within your church. Now, for Newspring, I'll speak to us specifically. We're a staff-led church. So the leadership of our church has gone to the heart of God. And this has happened since the transition of our previous senior pastor, us having to fire him in 2016. In 2017, the leadership of our church came together to say, hey, what are the things that we're going to value as a church? And so with that, one of those values is pursuing uncommon unity, where we don't want to be known as a young church, because for a long time, that was Newspring. We were very young in our staff, but also in our congregation. The music's very loud. So everything, it seemed like we were aiming for the younger generation. At the same time, we were known as a white church. Most of our staff is white. And so it just seemed like that was the heart of our church. But since 2017, we've had an increase in our staff from generationally, but at the same time, racial and ethnically. And it started with the heart of the leadership of our church. And so I say that to other churches as well, is one, you have to start theologically. Is this God's heart? And then, yes, the answer is yes. So two, you have to start with your heart. So I think for Black churches and white churches specifically, because that's the real divide in America, you have to start with the leadership to say, what is your heart? And you have to start where you are. So if you recognize there are no partnerships with the other, specifically race, then how can you bridge that gap in your prayer gatherings, in outreach events, things for the community? I think it's the small things like that we need to bridge that gap. Now, on the flip side, what I would say is a lot of times churches try to go too fast to bridge the gap. And that's where I say, hey, pump the brakes, because if you have no relationship with the other, then it's not going to work. Like, you need authentic relationships. I'm not saying that you do this event once a year. I'm saying, are you going to lunch consistently? Are you going to breakfast consistently? Because it's through those real relationships that you understand that there is a difference between race and culture. And I'll unpack that pretty quickly. I'll try to. What I mean by that is I've had a lot of white friends over the years say, hey, I had a Black friend in school, or, I've got this Black friend, et cetera, et cetera. And then 2020 happens and everyone's calling me, specifically all of my white friends. So I'm saying, but you've told me that you have a Black friend. So why are you caught off guard by the trauma and the rioting and the looting? What I recognize is those Black friends act just like them, in the same socioeconomic class as them. So you see a different race, but this different race acts just like you. So the difference between culture is there is a white culture, there's a Black culture, there's a Hispanic culture. And that's why scripture uses ethnicity, because ethnicity speaks into the culture. And so Black culture is that we're very charismatic people. We're loud, we're fun, we worship, we express ourselves in worship. This is deep. And so when you talk about your Black friends, oftentimes they're not speaking of Black friends that represent Black culture. It's Black friends that have assimilated to white culture. And that's what has caused the divide. So I hope that makes sense. I went on a little bit of a trail there. But I just want to be helpful to my white brothers and sisters to know that there is a difference between race and culture. So
if I say something today and I shouldn't have said it, you need to tell me, and we're not going to edit it out because when the riots happened, I had my friend Dutch Coleman, Howard Coleman, who used to be at Clemson. I had him on and we talked, and I even asked him this question: are we supposed to say Black churches or African American churches? And he goes, well, it depends. I'm going, you can't tell me that. That's not fair. You have to know the setting you're in when you can either say it's, and I'm going, okay, because we're not going to resolve the issues that exist without talking about things and without having the opportunity to say something. And if you say it wrong, have someone say, really, you don't want to say it that way. And so I'm trying, I have never tried harder to learn more than I have in the last few years, because and I shared this with you earlier. I want 95 Network to be able to help African-American churches. Now, and specifically, we come up with excuses of why we don't come together. It's easier for an Anglo or a white church to say, well, we can't really work with the Spanish community because there's a language barrier.
Right.
We don't have a language barrier here.
That's right.
It's just deep-seated in the heart prejudice. It's just that simple. So I want to ask you this, and you can tell me if this is wrong, because this is something that I observed in high school. It seems to me that when slavery, quote unquote, was abolished, that the church should have apologized.
Correct.
And for me, it seems like to me, because a white church hasn't apologized, or again, I'm not saying today, but back then, the spirit of slavery still exists. Because the church is the only entity that the Lord said, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked, I'll heal the land. I just feel like that a lot of the issues that continue to be pervasive happen because we never really ever came clean. Is that off? Is that on? Is that stupid? I mean, what do you think?
That's on. I agree. I think I've learned the ignorance of my white brothers and sisters. And when I say the ignorance, not because of not caring, there's just an unawareness. And the unawareness comes from a lack of relationship, really raw relationship. And it's again, this political divide has divided so much that most of us are so, I hate to say dumb, but so dumb that we can't even see it. Fox News is teaching something completely different than CNN. And at the same time, we have to even look back to think, why would most, and I'm not saying all Black people are Democrats or liberals, whatever language you want to use, but there is a reason why most Black people lean one way and most white people lean another way. It was set up that way years and years, generations back. And for us to not be aware of that, that's the first problem. But on the flip side of what you're saying, no apology from the white church, I think that it's because most white people don't know the history like what I'm telling you. And most Black people do, because it's a part of the story we've been told for generations from our family. So I've sat down with my grandparents, specifically my granddad, who's told me his story, his experiences in America, his experiences in the church, how he helped build Flat Rock AME Church. And throughout the rest of the week, he was, and I'll just share this story as an enlightening thing. So my granddad, I'm having conversations with him, telling him about Newspring, et cetera. He's like, man, that's good what God's doing there. But I said, I want for you to come and help bridge the gap. And he's saying, I can't leave Flat Rock. I'm saying to myself, like, but why? And he's saying, you need to understand that when I was a kid, we had to work sun up, sundown, Monday through Saturday. Our only day of freedom was Sunday. And in this moment, it hits me that this is why we worship all day. So if you look at the Black church, we don't just go. So good. We go from 11 to about 2:30. And so I'm having this conversation with my granddad, and the Spirit is revealing to me, this is why the older Black generation likes to be in church all day, because they experience so much trauma Monday through Saturday, being on a white man's property, having to work sun up, sundown. The only day of freedom is Sunday. But until I asked my granddad that question, I never would have known the answer. And so I think, again, for most white people, they don't have relationships with Black people to know that part of the story. But at the same time, the receiving news from different talking heads that's telling them something complete opposite of that narrative, and it's being skewed, and that's where the enemy is dividing. And so that's what's heartbreaking for me. And that's why I think there is no apology from the white church, because most of the white church has been told a narrative through the other generations, and it's been, hey, they do their thing and we do our thing. That's what both of us have been taught. And so because of that, there's been a divide, and something has to change, and that change has to happen now. And whether I get to see all of it, I'm going to fight for it so that whenever I do hand it off to my kids, it'll be better and not worse. I hope that makes sense, what I just said. I went on
There's just a lot of things you're revealing.
Yeah.
Things we don't know.
So how do we expose that narrative and change that? You know, I know that you kind of touched on building relationships. You know, white people with black people with white people. But like, what are some, you got a small church pastor that's listening and he's like, where do I even start?
Yeah.
I mean, what are the questions to ask?
Yeah. I would say the biggest thing is there's a couple of things: intentionality, consistency. Mm-hmm. So there has to be an intentional.
So we can't just do race relations Sunday once a year, because I know churches who did that for years. Race relations Sunday once a year.
Do that. Here's the problem: if you do race relations Sunday, then you're a critical race theorist at this point.
So don't even go there.
But it's like, I'm afraid, as a black man who's a leader of unity and diversity at Newspring Church, if I post anything race related, I'm a critical race theorist. And it's like, I have to give context for everything. And that's the problem. So we have to see that, like, that's how we can see how the enemy has slivered in and trying to destroy. But back to this intentionality and consistency. Mm-hmm. We have to be intentional with our prayers. What do we actually want to see God do? Because most people are saying that they want to see God do it, but we have to understand God can do it, but he wants to do it in and through us. And so this is where my passion comes in, because it's, if you can't sit down at a table with someone that's different than you and at the same time have a different belief than you, then that shows that you don't have compassion in your heart. What is that? And Jesus was full of compassion. Not was, he is. Two, we have to be consistent in this. The other problem with the church at large, I'm saying black churches and white churches, we only think about these racial unity when social moments happen. Because of that, it's causing the white side to think that this is a liberal agenda. It's causing the black side to think that white people only care about it when a social moment happens. Mm-hmm. So this is where I'm saying at Newspring Church, the fact that I'm in this role, we're going to pursue this. We have the language of pursuing uncommon unity. We're going to pursue this by being consistent and intentional. Mm-hmm. And this is going to start through prayer, not just in our gatherings on a Sunday, but behind closed doors in our meetings. We're going to call down the things of heaven here on earth. And we're not going to be surprised when those things happen. At the same time, I want to help my brothers and sisters seek out relationships with other minorities that's not me, because it's exhausting to me to meet with 300 different people to answer the same questions. No, find relationships in your community. So all of this to say, Carolee, I'm sorry. If I'm a pastor in a community, and I don't have any relationships with all, one, start to pray that you want to have a friendship and a relationship with a black pastor. Start there. And once you have that relationship, praise God for it. And then two, be honest in the conversation. What are the things that you want to learn from this black pastor? And maybe it's not a black pastor, maybe it's Hispanic, depending on what your community demographic is. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the relationships you want to seek. And as you do that, ask real and honest questions. Here's what most white people don't understand. We don't like surface level conversations. I'm saying all ethnic minorities, not just black people. Mm-hmm. We like raw, authentic, etc. So as Dale was saying, man, I was shocked by your authenticity. The black people weren't. That's who we are. Mm-hmm. It's like, I will get, because at my family gatherings, I do the same thing. This is who we are naturally. Mm-hmm. We express ourselves. So when the rioting and looting happens, it's an authentic moment that we're angry, we're crying out, we're asking for help. We don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that as a couple of things: intentional and consistent. Start with prayer, seek relationships. Once you have those relationships, be honest, and then figure out ways that you can bridge the gap in your community will be the piece. And from there, see what God does over the next 10 years as you're consistent with that, because this is the other problem. People want to solve it in a year or two. Yeah. And then don't see it, you grow weary. But what does scripture say? Don't grow weary in doing what? Good. This is a good thing. We can't grow weary. And so this is where I want to talk to pastors of, hey, put a 10-year vision out and see what are the things that you want to see. And I can say for Newspring Church, within 10 years of now, I hope that we're 20% ethnic minority Newspring Church. And so it's going to take pursuit. It's going to take intentionality, and we're going to be consistent. So I've talked too much. You talk now. Ask me.
I've got actually another question.
Yeah.
On the flip side, what would you say to Black pastors, Black churches about, what they can even do too, to be maybe open? I know that you mentioned there's a lot of mistrust, there. What are some, kind of things that you would say to them about kind of working towards this, bridging the gap, in the future?
Give our white brothers and sisters a chance.
A chance.
Yep. It's as simple as that.
Which is hard. That takes a lot of vulnerability.
When you have decades and generations of lack of trust. And again, I think one of the really important things you're speaking to is, we're Americans. We're used to solving every problem instantly. So the pandemic, it's been the greatest thing that's ever happened to the church. Now, I know I just made people run off the road with that statement, but because we couldn't resolve it quickly. I wrote an article last fall that's on our website. If you guys want to look at it, it's called 7 Years in 7 Weeks. And basically what happened with the pandemic was we found the trajectory that our church was on. We found where we were going to be in 7 years, but it happened in 7 weeks because everything shut down, and what our practices that were happening, everything was exposed. And so, today it's all exposed, man. You can't deny the fact that every stadium's full. People are traveling like crazy. Now the mask mandate's gone. You can fly, even when we were flying like crazy anyway. The malls are full, the concerts are full, everything's full, but the church is not.
That's right.
And we can't ignore that anymore. And we work with a lot of churches that are trying to ignore it, and that's not going to turn out well for them. This particular issue is something that we're not going to resolve it quickly, and so we give up. And so that was such a good word to us there, man.
Also that in John 17, so that the world will know that we are one. In most of our churches, we are so segregated, and the world doesn't know. And
it doesn't bother us, Hykeng. That's the thing. It didn't even cross our mind. Unless Dale and Carol Lee get some guy on that knows what he's talking about and do a podcast, most churches don't. It doesn't even cross their mind. And the reason this is a passion for me is you talk about playing football at Belton Honeypath. Well, I played at Wren High School, and when I went to Wren High School, and I have to say this, and boy, I need to say this the right way. The majority of my extended family are racially prejudiced, and I never could. I hated it. I couldn't understand it. And I don't even want to go into all the details of what that means.
Can I just say thank you for saying that? Most white people won't even admit to that.
Oh, it's embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. And so here I am. I'm playing football with these guys, and I get really serious in my senior year at high school about my walk with Jesus, and I know that God's calling me to ministry. So I start trying to witness to all these guys. And there's two stories that I think about. I have this one friend. His name was Ricky Haygood. He played football. He went on and played for the Gamecocks. He started all 4 years. He was the middle guard on defense, the nose tackle. Started all 4 years. Huge guy. One of my best friends ever. And I could not take him to church with me. And no one said you can't bring him to church with you. I just knew that I couldn't.
That's it.
No one said, he's not. In fact, actually, and this is even another issue because you know Clemson football and everything. He could have gone with me because he was a celebrity.
That's it.
He wasn't a regular person. You know what I mean by that? He just wasn't a regular average guy. So he could have gone, and everybody, hey, great to have you here, buddy. That broke my heart. But then this literally happened at the church I grew up in. On a Tuesday night, I took one of my other friends. His name was James. I won't say his last name. I was trying to lead James to Jesus, and I took him to our gym. Every Tuesday night we had a gym. Of course, in the church we called it the Family Life Center, but we had a gym, and we played basketball on Tuesday. And it was just people all over the community came, and I had the chairman of the deacons meet us as we're heading in, and just says he can't play here tonight. And I'm going, why not? He said the gym is just for members. Well, see, I knew that was a lie. I knew white people in there that weren't members of our church. I never set foot back in that gym. And at that day, that was heartbreaking to me. I'm sitting there trying to lead this guy to Jesus. And so I have that deep seated in me. And so Gina and I eventually, moved on to another church, went to a multicultural non-denom church, and it was like 40% black and 60% white. And it was like, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. But when I was there, I made some really good friendships. And one of my friends, Tom, told me, he said, Dale, you need to understand the prejudice on the black side is just as strong as it is on the white side. Mm-hmm. So when you're around prejudice, you only understand your side of the prejudice.
Correct.
So, Hykeng, this stuff's been in me for 40 years, man. I want to bridge the gap.
Yeah,
I've been very intentional. I've got some African-American friends or black friends. See, I don't know if I'm supposed to say African-American or black. I just don't know.
When you talk to me, you can just say black.
Okay. Because it's not offensive if you call me white, but anyway, and I'm not even white, I'm kind of whatever I am. Anyway, I've got friends that I'm intentionally hanging out with. We intentionally have added black folks on our team. We've intentionally, we have as many black folks as we can on the podcast. We're going to keep doing that. Hykeng, I want to solve this problem, man.
Yeah, man, you're doing it. And I just want to say thank you for, of course, having me on here and to have the heart of God essentially and work towards this, because again, I believe that as we continue to fight through this, the next generation it won't be as hard for them. That's my goal in this. Just seeking God myself. So thank you.
Well, I want to say this too, when Jesus, this is not a coincidence that the night before he goes to the cross, and you've alluded to this, that he actually sweated blood praying a prayer. And into that prayer, the last thing he talks about before the soldiers come is God make them one.
That's right.
So the world will know.
That's it.
And so the world doesn't know Jesus because we can't even, this is not like reaching out to lost black people or lost Hispanic people or lost Asian people. We can't even get brothers and sisters who have different skin colors, which, by the way, a little preaching here, is going to exist in heaven.
That's it.
John said there's going to have you see people of every nation, tribe, and so we're not all going to be all white folks in heaven.
Right.
We got to solve this problem. I'm sorry.
That's right. That's it, man.
Just killing it.
You're
last
on
thing
it.
on his heart, man. It was the last thing he prayed. He could have prayed anything. He prayed that we'd be one.
That's it.
And
Knox, one of our teaching pastors here, says that if it's the last thing Jesus prayed for, it should be the first thing that we fight for.
There you go.
Always stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Hykeng. Oh,
say that again. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying this has been great. I think for me, one of the biggest things that we can do is just talk about it too.
That's it.
A lot of exposure and conversation and communication.
And being intentional about reaching out to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Setting up lunches, hanging out with people,
And being consistent. Like, white people love a calendar. Can I just say, white people love.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
On the calendar. And
is that a white person thing? I mean, I love a calendar.
It's a white person thing. Black folks don't care about a calendar.
No. Church may start at 10, but they get there about 11, and it may be over at 2, but they're still there at 4. I know. I've been around that.
Oh, we get ready at 10 o'clock.
What about a to-do list?
White people are very strategic, but at the same time, that's what the Black culture, we need them. So when I came into Newspring, it was like, oh, I got to show up on time. Like, yeah, you got to be on time because this shows value. I'm like, oh, okay, I just take my time. So again, I had to learn a different culture versus, just being around a different race. But at the same time, they've got to learn, hey, I don't want to just drink water all day. Can I have some fruit punch, like some Kool-Aid or something? Like, where's the orange crush at? Like, that's just the difference. White people have to be healthy. It's like, nah, my wife, she's white and Cuban. She's like, hey, the kids can't eat so many fruit snacks, etc. I'm like, no, put some more sugar in that food. We need some flavor. So,
Hykeng, my mama gave me sweet tea in a bottle, so I'm kind of leaning more. Maybe that's why I have such a heart for solving these problems.
That's it. I'm sorry, I was going out the rabbit trail. Carolee, you got me.
That might be a little bit of a Southern thing too, the sugar.
True.
It is. Carry on.
Oh no, well, as we're wrapping up, we always love to ask the question. You're talking to small and mid-sized church pastors here today. What is a word of hope or encouragement or advice that you would like to give them?
Wow. Ephesians 3:10 is where Paul says, that through the church, that we would make known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. And what he's talking about before that is the difference between Jews and Gentiles coming together as one. In Ephesians 2, the first part talks about vertical relationship, then horizontal. And he reminds them of the unity in the spirit. And so I just want to say to pastors, local church pastors, whether it's a large church, smaller church, know that if we do this right, we will make known to the rulers and authorities, not in America, but in the heavenly places, the manifold wisdom of God. And that's what we need to be fighting for. And so that would be the encouragement that I would give to pastors of, hey, that's why this is important. It's not just so that we can just show the world. We also let those know in the heavenly places who is actually the head of the church, and that's Jesus. So that's what I would say.
So if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to catch up with Hykeng?
Brad.Cooper@Newspring. No, I'm kidding. Email me at Hykeng.Paul@Newspring.cc. I'm not sure if I need to spell it, because if it will be in the notes of how to
we'll get it right for you. We'll put it in the notes right for you.
Can you say it one more time? Hykeng.Paul at what?
Newspring.cc.
Okay. Yep, we can definitely put that in the show notes.
Perfect. Thank you enough, man. I feel like there's more conversations to be had, but at least this one got us moving in the right direction. Again, this is a huge passion of mine. And if you are an African-American leader, or maybe just you're attending a church, I just want you to know 95 Network wants to help. You know, you don't have to adopt the 95 Network way. And I'm not, we don't have the answers to all your problems. I don't want to say that. I had a conversation with a black pastor down in Texas a few weeks ago, and he said, Dale, you got to make sure you don't come out and just say, well, hey, this will work in your church. You got to understand the context. And so I understand the context of everything that we do and offer is different, but we want to help, and we want to help you. And we know things that we can do to help churches grow, but we want to help you get a healthy church today, so you can reach that next generation, because at the end of the day, they need to know Jesus. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.